Good evening.
What he has up on the screen, you'll see it up there. So,
Yep.
yeah, you don't actually have it.
Yep. Welcome to the third session of this summary exposition on intelligent design. Once again, we will hear from Professor Granville Sewell as he walks us through this material. It's pretty dense, but I think it's fascinating, and it's just a summary. And that's the amazing part of this. So I commend his book to you. It's a fun read. For me, it's been a fun read. I'm not quite finished with it yet, but I'm working hard at it. And it's opened my eyes to a lot of things, and I think you'll see some things tonight that have really excited me because I got an early look at something called metamorphosis, and you'll see a bit of that this evening. But before the professor begins, let us begin with prayer, shall we? The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Lord God, you have given us a marvelous creation, a creation that not only sustains us, but amazes us. Lord God, let us have our eyes, our hearts, and our minds open to all the possibilities of how you have put this planet and this cosmos into motion, and what your intent is for us as we live among it and upon it. Lord God, move our hearts, and when our hearts have been moved, move our feet and our minds and our hands as well to serve you in your creation. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. I turn you over now to Professor Sewell.
Okay, well, the first 2 weeks we spent the whole time talking about fine-tuning, mostly what I call, or is called global fine-tuning. That is the fine-tuning of nearly all the basic parameters of physics, the speed of light, Planck's constant, on and on. They had to be almost exactly what they are, at least some of them did, and others could have varied by a few percent. But anyway, we're extremely lucky, or something, with the laws of physics and the constants, the fundamental constants of physics, and that is such a strong argument for the existence of God that it's actually convinced a lot of scientists, certainly not all, but a fair number of scientists look at that and say, that's design. But an awful lot of these still say that, God had something to do or designed the laws of physics, but that was it and stopped there. But my question is, if you believe that God designed the laws of physics to make life possible, then why would you insist a priori that he couldn't have done anything more? And that's what they do. Before even looking at the evidence, a lot of them rule out the possibility of God being involved in the origin of life or evolution or even the origin of humans. It depends on who you talk to, of course, but there are a lot of scientists that are convinced by the fine-tuning. But now we get into something more controversial, a lot more controversial. And in fact, by my definition of intelligent design, we're just only today starting to talk about intelligent design. And as I said, why, if you believe that God designed the laws of physics to make life possible, and that's the only conclusion you can draw other than the idea that there are many, many universes and random values for the constants. But if you believe that, why would you rule out a priori that God was involved in life further? And in fact, intelligent design people believe that God was involved further. And I want to read a portion of my book that kind of defines what intelligent design is usually, intelligent design is usually defined, although I'm not that interested in definitions and labels, but here we go. Okay, so at the very bottom, there's you can actually look at my book free here if you click on this. And the first chapter is what is intelligent design, and let me read the last couple of paragraphs of the first chapter. So what exactly do these ID intelligent design scientists believe? There is no general agreement among advocates of intelligent design as to exactly where, when, or how design was manifest in the history of life. Most, but not quite all, accept the standard timeline for the beginning. Let me make this bigger here. Most, but not quite all, accept the standard timeline for the beginning of the universe of life and the major animal groups. And Steve Meyer's book, not the God hypothesis, but the previous one about Darwin's doubt, focuses on the sudden appearance of most of the animal phyla in the Cambrian explosion some 500 million years ago. Many, including Michael Behe, accept common descent. Probably all reject natural selection as an adequate explanation for the complexity of life, but so do many other scientists who are not ID proponents. So what exactly do you have to believe to be an intelligent design proponent? And I continue, perhaps the best way to answer this question is to state clearly what you have to believe to not believe in intelligent design. Peter Urone, in his 2001 physics textbook, writes, one of the most remarkable simplifications in physics is that only 4 distinct forces account for all known phenomena. And that's a common statement in physics. That's commonly believed. The prevailing view of science today is that physics explains all of chemistry, chemistry explains all of biology, and biology completely explains the human mind. Thus, physics alone explains the human mind than all that it does. That is what you have to believe to not believe in intelligent design, that the origin and evolution of life and the evolution of human consciousness and intelligence are due entirely to a few unintelligent forces of physics. Thus, you must believe that a few unintelligent forces of physics alone could have rearranged the fundamental particles of physics into computers and science texts and jet airplanes. Contrary to common belief, to be an ID proponent, you do not have to believe that all species were created simultaneously a few thousand years ago, or that humans are unrelated to earlier primates, or that natural selection cannot cause bacteria to develop a resistance to antibiotics. If you believe that a few fundamental unintelligent forces of physics alone could have rearranged the basic particles of physics into Apple iPhones, you are probably not an ID proponent, even if you believe in God. But if you believe there must have been more than unintelligent forces at work somewhere, somehow in the whole process, congratulations, you're one of us after all. So, as I say, this is more controversial. Somebody asked me at the question and answer session, I don't see him here today, but he asked, do intelligent design proponents believe that God fiddled with individual species or something like that? And I didn't have a very good answer at the time, but what I should have said is that most of us will admit that we aren't sure. Most of us will admit that we're not sure exactly where, how, or when God was involved, although I think nearly everybody believes he was involved in the origin of life, all of ID proponents, and the major groups of animals. And but does it go down to the species, subspecies level? Who knows? We admit we don't know exactly how, obviously, God intervened, but we believe he had to intervene. And these couple of paragraphs explain why I believe that. Basically, just if you think about what you have to believe to not believe in intelligent design, even if you believe in God, even if you believe God created the laws of physics, designed them to make life possible, but you don't believe he did anything after that. I don't really have a theological or philosophical problem with that. I have a logical problem with that. The laws of physics are very cleverly designed and probably can explain the creation of stars, the sun and the planets, and can explain chemistry, but I don't believe they can explain humans. To have a logical problem with that. They're not that cleverly designed. So, if you think about it, that's really what they believe. That to not believe in ID, you have to believe that these 4, or even if there's more than 4, but unintelligent forces alone could have rearranged the particles into, laptops and everything you see here, because, if you don't believe in intelligent design, you believe that human mind is just matter in motion and so forth. So even though we're not sure exactly where God was involved, we are convinced that you can't explain life without him. And so let's see. I want to first, so right now I'm going to show the last 4 sections of my original video. This, the course is based on this video and a summary of the evidence for intelligent design. And if you go down here and click on, oh, by the way, in case you weren't here before, if you go to faithabq.org/classes, you'll find a link to the latest version of the study guide, and that's really all you need because you can click on the videos and see them yourself. It also has links to the last two classes and that Nancy's created from the recordings and spliced in the videos, so they pretty much cover what we covered in here. So the first two are already out there. This one hopefully will be soon. Anyway, if you go to the study guide and you click on the origin of life, it'll go to that video, but it'll start at the third.
It is often claimed that science is close to understanding how the first simple life form arose through entirely natural processes. To see how baseless this claim is, you only have to realize that with all our advanced technology, we are still not close to designing any type of self-replicating machine. That is still pure science fiction. So how could we imagine that such a machine could have arisen by pure chance, even given a universe with fine-tuned laws and a planet with fine-tuned conditions? When we add technology to such a machine to move toward the goal of reproduction, we only move the goalpost, as now we have a more complicated machine to reproduce. Maybe someday human engineers will design a self-replicating machine like we see everywhere in the living world, but it will not happen in my lifetime, and it will not be simple, and it will certainly not show that such a machine could have arisen without design. Materialists believe they already understand how the first living things evolved into intelligent beings, but they really do not have a clue. To appreciate this, you only have to realize that what they are forced to believe is that the four fundamental unintelligent forces of physics alone could have rearranged the basic particles of physics on Earth into tall buildings, computers and cell phones, and airplanes and the internet. As my new video, Why Evolution is Different, brings out, the laws of physics are very cleverly designed and probably can explain everything that has happened on other planets, but they are obviously not clever enough to explain by themselves the development of computers and cars and Apple iPhones. This video also points out how similar the fossil record is to the development of human technology, with obvious similarities between each new invention and previous designs, but with large gaps where major new features appear for the same reasons. Gradual development of the new organs that gave rise to new orders, classes, and phyla would require the development of new but not yet useful features. So Darwinism could not explain the development of these new features even if they did occur gradually, and they don't. Here is a picture of 3 children in the 1950s. One of them is me, the other 2 are not. I saw the world from inside one of these children. I saw every picture that entered through his eyes. I heard every sound that entered through his ears, and when he fell on the sidewalk, I felt his pain. How did I end up inside one of these children? This is a question that rarely seems to trouble evolutionists. They talk about human evolution as if they were outside observers and never seem to wonder how they got inside one of the animals they are studying. They consider that human brains are just complicated computers, and so to explain how we got here, they just have to explain how these mechanical brains evolved. But even if they could explain how animals with mechanical brains evolved out of the primeval slime, that would leave the most important question, the one evolutionists never seem to even wonder about, still unsolved. How did I get inside one of these animals?
So we're basically going to talk about 3 and 4 today, the origin of life and evolution. And Let me see if I can bring up the study guide. It seems to be okay now. Let's see. So if you go to, so the yellow is basically what the narrator says, and then there's comments here. But if you click on this, hopefully, oh, well, just slow. It goes to a recent publication of mine about human-engineered self-replicating machines. Rather than view it there, let me bring it up here. And I want to read a little segment of it. It's basically, the point is here that, pure chance is supposed to have created the first life form. You can't credit Darwinism to the origin of life. Supposedly you can explain everything after life started. I certainly don't believe that, as you'll see, but nobody, imagines that Darwinism could explain the origin of the first life. So it basically has to be chance chemical processes. And the fact is that we're not anywhere close to creating a self-replicating machine ourselves. That's what this is about, and explains why we're not close. And let me read part of it. A little larger. With all our advanced technology, we're not close to producing human-engineered self-replicating machines. This is significant because it is widely believed that, for example, that the first self-replicators on Earth must have arisen through chance chemical processes, it being impossible to appeal to natural selection of replication errors before anything could self-replicate. To better appreciate the enormous difficulties in designing such machines, and thus the difficulties in understanding how the first living things arose on Earth, let's think about what would be required to build, say, a self-replicating Model T car. We know how to build a simple Model T. Now let's build a factory inside this car so that it can produce Model T cars automatically, and call the new car with the Model T factory inside a Model U. A car with an entire automobile factory inside, which never requires any human intervention, is far beyond our current technology, but it doesn't seem impossible that future generations might be able to build a Model U. Of course, the Model U cars are not self-replicators because they can only construct simple Model Ts. So let's add more technology to this car so that it can build Model Us, that is, Model Ts with car building factories inside. This new Model V car with a fully automated factory inside capable of producing Model Us, which are themselves far beyond our current technology, would be unthinkably complex. But is this new Model V now a self-replicator? No, because it only builds the much simpler Model U. The Model V species will become extinct after 2 generations because their children will be Model Us and their grandchildren will be infertile Model Ts. So back to work, and each time we add technology to this car and to move it closer to the goal of reproduction, we only move the goalpost because now we have a more complicated car to reproduce. It seems that the new models would grow exponentially in complexity, and even if we were able to engineer self-replicating cars, it is hard to imagine that without any human maintenance, these cars could keep reproducing themselves for more than a few generations before errors accumulate to the point that all replication halts. And here we have ignored the very difficult question of where these cars get the raw materials they need to supply their factories. Some will object here that the first living things may have been much simpler than self-replicating cars. It is widely believed that you only need to explain how very simple self-replicators could have arisen through chance chemical processes, because then natural selection of the resulting duplication errors could take over and explain how self-replicators far more complex than cars could have arisen. But even if we could explain the appearance of simple self-replicators, imagining trying to design self-replicating cars may help us appreciate the enormity of the difficulties facing any scientific explanation, let alone one which relies on replication errors, for the unimaginably complex self-replicators that we see everywhere in the living world. And then I go in to say, well, okay, let's imagine something much simpler like a self-replicating cardboard box, and basically the same thing happens. You add technology to it to make the box, and then it doesn't reproduce itself, so you have to add factories to produce factories and so forth. So anyway, that's one of the problems with the origin of life. It's not as simple as Darwin imagined. even just the self-replication itself is far beyond our technology, and yet that's supposed to have happened by pure chance, basically. Really, the simplest living thing today is far more complicated than anything we can produce, but most scientists believe that that it's obvious that couldn't have come about by pure chance. So they say, well, it must have started with a self-replicating molecule, and that made errors, and and then after a long time it got to self-replicating cells. But self-replication itself is very problematic. Humans aren't able to do it, aren't close to it. So why would we believe that chance could produce the first living thing? Okay, now let me show you a video from someone who knows more about the origin of life than I do. This is one of the Discovery Science Uprising videos. Let's see. So anyway, if you want to read the rest of that article, you can just click on that. And okay, so now I'm going to show a Science Uprising video about the origin of life.
Did life really spontaneously generate itself from chemicals? Has science shown this? We tracked down James Tour, one of the world's leading experts in synthetic organic chemistry, to find out.
All of these little pictures of molecules coming together to form the first cell are fallacious, are ridiculous. The origin of life community has not been honest. They will write in their very papers, they will see some small phenomena and extrapolate what this means in the context of origin of life. And then they will work with the press, and the press will extrapolate it all the more. And you get many, many people deceived, thinking that life has been all but made. All of this is a lie.
Scientist Craig Venter creates life for the first time in a laboratory.
We're here today to announce the first synthetic cell.
We haven't created life, nowhere close. What they did is they took a cell. They took the genome out of that cell. They manufactured a genome that's similar to it, and they put it in. That is akin to taking an engine out of a Ford and putting it into a Buick and then saying, look, I created automobiles. No, you just took one piece, and it's not even the engine, it's just the computer control box you took out of one car and you put it in another car. That's what it was like. But the design of the computer control box you got from other cells.
Other scientists say they've been able to create protocells in the lab that are the stepping stones to the first life.
I can mix some chemicals together in a test tube in my lab, and these chemicals will start to self-associate to form larger and larger structures. The protocell moves as a metabolism, it could use energy, and it moves around.
Protocells are a bunch of nonsense. That is like a proto-turkey. I take 20 pounds of sliced turkey meat from a delicatessen. I throw that into a pot. I add some turkey broth. I warm that up, and I throw in some feathers, and I say, that's a proto-turkey. Yeah, there's no order to it, but if you wait long enough, a turkey will come gobbling out. That sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? That's precisely what origin of life researchers have done when they make a protocell.
Wait a second. Haven't we been taught with hundreds of millions of years anything is possible?
Time is actually the enemy. You let these chemicals that have been made sit around. They show the degradation in a period of weeks. Weeks is the twinkling of an eye when it comes to prebiotic timescales. The chemicals decompose. So to think that the molecules could be made and sit there waiting for other molecules to come in, it doesn't happen. Organic chemistry doesn't work that way.
Well, if life didn't spontaneously generate on Earth, what about scientists who believe that life must have come here from outer space?
Whether you want to have it originate from Earth or from some other planet, you have to have the origin of life. You have to have the origin of that first cell. How does that happen? We have no idea.
So with all the advances in scientific research and the study of life, why can't we figure this out?
With all of origin of life research going on, the problem is becoming harder all the time, not easier. And the reason it's become harder is because we understand more about the complexity of a cell.
To help explain the complexity of living cells, we turn to molecular biologist Douglas Axe.
To get an idea of the complexity of a living cell, think of a factory with thousands of pieces of machinery all working together to do some coordinated task. A cell is actually far more complicated than that factory because factories don't maintain themselves. People have to maintain factories, and factories certainly don't make new factories. Whereas with a living cell, all the parts that wear out are automatically remanufactured within the cell. Not only that, the cell is manufacturing a new cell as well. Human-made factories don't even come close.
For a living cell to exist and perform such complex tasks, it takes some very detailed instructions, which are chemically encoded in our DNA.
If you have a string of nucleic acids like DNA or RNA has, you have to have a precise sequence because that translates to what proteins are needed to build the organism. That's called the information code.
But where did all that information, these detailed instructions, come from to build the first cell?
We don't have a tool to assess that within chemistry.
Laboratory chemistry may not, but Stephen Meyer is convinced origin science does have the tools.
Is there anything we know of that does have the causal power, the ability to generate new information, and therefore could explain the origin of the first cell? And I think there is, and that's the idea of intelligent design.
Intelligent design is defined as the theory that certain features of the natural world are best explained by an intelligent cause, not an undirected process.
Because what we know from our experience is that intelligent agents can produce information, and indeed do produce information in a digital or typographic form, the form of information that we find in the DNA molecule, functional digital information. Whenever we see information and we trace it back to its source, whether we find it in a section of software code or a paragraph in a book or in a hieroglyphic inscription, we always find that a mind played a role in generating that information.
Don't be fooled by the hype. Materialists are further from explaining the origin of life than ever before, yet they still refuse to consider the only observable source known to create information code, an intelligent designing mind. We are not materialists. We see the human soul. We experience love. We live with purpose. We fight for justice. We are the quiet majority, and we will be quiet no longer.
Okay, so that's all about the origin of life, and now we're going to go into 4A, which is about evolution. How, nobody really claims that we know how life started. Hardly anybody. There you find some hype like you saw in those headlines, but the experts still admit that we still don't know how life formed. And James Tour doesn't believe we're anywhere close, and I'm sure he's right. But as far as how we got from the first living thing to humans, there are a lot of people that believe we do understand that, and of course we don't. And that's what my other video is about, which I'm going to show you now. We're trying to make up some time here for the, but let me show it directly instead of, you can click on the study guide and get the YouTube version, but we probably get some problems there. So let me bring it up directly here. And so I'm going to show the first 14 minutes of this video. This is my more professionally made video.
Over 130 years ago, University of California geology professor Joseph LeConte summarized the fossil record.
In successive geological faunas, the change seems rather by substitution than by transmutation. Species seem to come in suddenly, with all their specific characters perfect, remain substantially unchanged as long as they last, and then die out and are replaced by others. Certainly, this looks much like immutability of specific forms and supernaturalism of specific origin.
LeConte also acknowledges that natural selection cannot explain the appearance of new, irreducibly complex features called novelties in his day.
Neither can it explain the first steps of advance toward usefulness. An organ must be already useful before natural selection can take hold of it to improve on it.
After acknowledging that the only direct evidence, the fossil record, does not support the idea of gradual change, and that the only theory ever taken seriously as to the causes of these changes can explain everything except anything new, LeConte nevertheless concludes,
We are confident that evolution is absolutely certain, not evolution as a special theory, Lamarckian, Darwinian, Spencerian, but evolution as a law of derivation of forms from previous forms. In this sense, it is not only certain, it is axiomatic. The origins of new phenomena are often obscure, even inexplicable, but we never think to doubt that they have a natural cause. For so to doubt is to doubt the validity of reason and the rational constitution of nature.
And so in 1888, LeConte acknowledges what will become clear to anyone who follows the modern debate between Darwinism and intelligent design. Evolution is an axiom, and axioms do not need supporting evidence. A 1980 New York Times article on a meeting at Chicago's Field Museum of Natural History of nearly all the leading evolutionists reports,
At issue during the Chicago meeting was macroevolution, a term that is itself a matter of debate, but which generally refers to the evolution of major differences, such as those separating species or larger classifications. Most agree macroevolution is, for example, what made crustaceans different from mollusks. It is the process by which birds and mammals evolved out of reptiles. Darwin suggested that such major products of evolution were the results of very long periods of gradual natural selection, the mechanism that is widely accepted today as accounting for minor adaptations. Darwin, however, knew he was on shaky ground in extending natural selection to account for differences between major groups of organisms. The fossil record of his day showed no gradual transitions between such groups, but he suggested that further fossil discoveries would fill the missing links. The pattern that we were told to find for the last 120 years does not exist, declared Niles Eldredge, a paleontologist from the American Museum of Natural History in New York. Eldredge reminded the meeting of what many fossil hunters have recognized as they trace the history of a species through successive layers of ancient sediments. Species simply appear at a given point in geologic time, persist largely unchanged for a few million years, and then disappear. There are very few examples, some say none, of one species shading gradually into another.
The New York Times writer assures us, however, that all of this does not suggest weakness in the fact of evolution, only in the perceived mechanism. Even if new features consistently appear suddenly in the fossil record and cannot be explained by natural selection, there is no doubt they were the result of entirely natural causes. That is an axiom that cannot be questioned. LeConte's axiom is the strongest argument against intelligent design. It is certainly understandable that LeConte and other scientists are confident that nothing is beyond the reach of their science. In every other field of science, naturalism has been spectacularly successful. Why should evolutionary biology be so different? To explain why evolution is different, so different that it requires a very different type of explanation, we need to look at what you have to believe to not believe in intelligent design. Peter Urone in College Physics writes,
One of the most remarkable simplifications in physics is that only 4 distinct forces account for all known phenomena.
But can 4 unintelligent forces of physics alone really rearrange atoms into computers and airplanes and science texts? It is difficult to even imagine a more obvious and spectacular violation of the more general statements of the second law of thermodynamics, such as, for an isolated system, the direction of spontaneous change is from order to disorder. But we are all familiar with the standard counter-argument. The Earth is not an isolated system. It receives energy from the sun. Early versions of the second law stated that a quantity called thermal entropy, which measures disorder in the temperature distribution, cannot decrease in an isolated system, but can decrease in an open system And some scientists generalize this to say that the second law allows any order increase in an open system as long as it is compensated by decreases outside the system. In a Smithsonian Magazine article, Isaac Asimov first acknowledges the apparent conflict between evolution and the second law.
You can argue, of course, that the phenomenon of life may be an exception. Life on Earth has steadily grown more complex, more versatile, more elaborate, more orderly over the billions of years of the planet's existence. From no life at all, living molecules were developed, then living cells, then living conglomerates of cells, worms, vertebrates, mammals, finally man. And in man is a 3-pound brain, which as far as we know is the most complex and orderly arrangement of matter in the universe. How could the human brain develop out of the primeval slime? How could that vast increase in order, and therefore that vast decrease in entropy, have taken place?
But then he uses the usual compensation argument to conclude that there is really no conflict.
Remove the sun and the human brain would have not developed. In the billions of years that it took for the human brain to develop, the increase in entropy that took place in the sun was far greater, far greater than the decrease that is represented by the evolution required to develop the human brain.
Professor Granville Sewell of the University of Texas, El Paso, has published multiple peer-reviewed articles critiquing the compensation argument. Most recently, in 2017, he published an article in Physics Essays. There he defined X order to be the negative of the entropy associated with the distribution of any diffusing component X. If X is heat, for example, X order is just thermal order, and showed that the equations for entropy change not only say that X order cannot increase in an isolated system, they also say that in an open system, the X order cannot increase faster than it is imported through the boundary. Thus, he argued, the equations of entropy change do not support the illogical compensation idea. Instead, they illustrate the tautology that
if an increase in order is extremely improbable when a system is isolated, it is still extremely improbable when the system is open, unless something is entering which makes it not extremely improbable.
The fact that order can increase in an open system does not mean that computers can appear on a barren planet as long as the planet receives solar energy. Something must be entering the system which makes the appearance of computers not extremely improbable. For example, computers. The whole critique of Asimov's widely used compensation argument is very simple and can be understood through a couple of simple stories. Here is a picture of a neighborhood in Moore, Oklahoma, taken before the 2013 tornado hit. Here is a picture taken right after the tornado. Fortunately, another tornado hit Moore a few days later and turned all this rubble back into houses and cars, as seen in this picture. If we asked you why you don't believe our story about the second tornado, you might say this tornado seems to violate the more general statements of the second law of thermodynamics, such as, for an isolated system, the direction of spontaneous change is from order to disorder. But we could use the compensation argument to reply, Moore is not an isolated system because tornadoes receive their energy from the sun, and the increase in order in Moore caused by the second tornado is easily compensated by decreases outside the system. Various reasons why the development of civilization does not violate the second law have been given, but all of them can equally well be used to argue that the second tornado did not violate it either. The only difference is, there is a theory which is widely accepted in the scientific world as to how civilizations could develop on barren planets, while there is no widely believed theory as to how tornadoes could turn rubble into houses and cars. Nevertheless, suppose we further said that we have a scientific theory that explains how certain rare types of tornadoes, under just the right conditions, really can turn rubble into houses and cars. You doubt our theory? You haven't even heard it yet. If our theory had been studied by the top meteorologists in the world and all agreed that it was plausible, would you take it seriously then? Still no? 2 more stories are needed to complete the picture. Here is a certain Earth-like planet in a certain solar system as it looked about 4 billion years ago. Next is the same location about 10,000 years ago. At its prime, this large city had tall buildings full of intelligent beings, computers, TV sets, and cell phones. It had libraries full of science texts and novels, and airports with jet planes. Scientists explain how civilization developed on this once barren planet as follows. 3 or 4 billion years ago, a collection of atoms formed by pure chance that was able to duplicate itself. These complex collections of atoms were somehow able to preserve their complex structures and pass them on to their descendants, generation after generation. Over a long period of time, the accumulation of duplication errors resulted in more and more elaborate collections of atoms. And eventually something called intelligence allowed some of these collections of atoms to design buildings and computers and airplanes and write encyclopedias and science texts. Sadly, there's a second story. A few years after these pictures were taken, this planet was hit by a massive solar flare from its sun, and all the intelligent beings died. Their bodies decayed, and their cells decomposed into simple organic and inorganic compounds. Most of the buildings collapsed immediately into rubble. Those that didn't crumbled eventually. Most of the computers and TV sets inside were smashed into scrap metal. Even those that weren't gradually turned into piles of rust. Most of the books in the libraries burned up. The rest rotted over time. And you can see the final result many years later. This time, the second story is natural and believable. It is the first story that is much more difficult to believe. The second story shows what natural causes normally do. They destroy order. While every other natural process tends to turn order into disorder, Darwinists have always believed that natural selection is the one unintelligent process in the universe that can create spectacular order out of disorder. But despite all the claims about the creative powers of natural selection, it has never actually been observed to produce anything new and complex, only devolution. Lehigh University biochemist Michael Behe, in his 2019 book Darwin Devolves, writes,
Darwinian evolution proceeds mainly by damaging or breaking genes, which counterintuitively sometimes helps survival. In other words, the mechanism is powerfully devolutionary. It promotes the rapid loss of genetic information. Laboratory experiments, field research, and theoretical studies all forcefully indicate that, as a result, random mutation and natural selection make evolution self-limiting. Darwin's mechanism works chiefly by squandering genetic information for short-term gain.
So perhaps natural selection of random mutations is like every other unintelligent cause in the universe after all, and tends to create disorder out of order, and not vice versa. Anyone who claims to have a scientific explanation for how unintelligent agents might be able to turn rubble into houses and cars would be expected to produce some very powerful evidence if they want their theory to be taken seriously. The burden of proof should be equally heavy on those who claim to have scientific explanation for how a few unintelligent forces of physics alone could rearrange the basic particles of physics into computers and encyclopedias and Apple iPhones. And there is no evidence that natural selection of random mutations can explain anything other than very minor adaptations.
Okay, that's the first 14 minutes of the video. That's all I was planning on showing today because it's basically relating back to my chapter 1 in the book. The main argument for me is very, very simple. If you don't believe in intelligent design, if you don't believe in a designer had anything to do with life or evolution or appearance of man, then think about what you do have to believe. You basically believe that these 4 unintelligent forces of physics created, well, I don't want to say laptops now because I'm not real impressed with laptops at the moment, but anyway. Now, some of you, I'm sure, find all of this a little too abstract, talking about the second law of thermodynamics and so forth. So let me promote something else that's a lot more concrete and down to earth. If you go to, let's try the study guide again. At the very bottom, almost the very bottom, are the links to 3 really wonderful films on design. One is Metamorphosis, which I loaned to Pastor Mark. He's really liked it. I'm going to show you the trailer. The other two are Flight and Living Waters, which are equally good. Let me just show you the trailer for Metamorphosis. It's basically, it's like an hour long, but it's spectacular photography, extremely well done. And it's like as good as any PBS documentary on nature, except that at the end they don't say, "Isn't it amazing what the struggle for survival can produce?" They give credit to the obvious source.
If you open the work of a lepidopterist, someone who studies butterflies, somewhere in that writing, you're going to find the language of astonishment.
Every one of these 20,000 species have different color patterns, and every one of them has different shaped wings. The diversity is just so magnificent.
As you watch a butterfly, to describe what you're looking at, you can't really put it into words. That's biology, it's also magic.
It's impossible to look at a caterpillar turning into a butterfly and not ask how. Their metamorphosis, their life cycle, how did this happen? This astonishing, remarkable transformation.
In a metamorphic insect, what you've got is two body plans. You have to first form one functional body plan, and then you have to switch gears and you have to take and form a new body plan. I am amazed by development when it goes from egg to caterpillar, because it's such an intricate process. But then you have to enter into the chrysalis stage and you have to get it right again. So it's like the problem squared.
You've got to get rid of or digest the caterpillar tissues. They won't work for the adult. In fact, the cells themselves disappear, but then their components are recycled and are turned into a kind of soup out of which the adult structures will be built. It's very carefully engineered. So you got to know where you're going to end up before you start.
It's like a different organism. Transitions have to take place in the heart. Transitions have to take place in the antennae. Transitions have to take place in the reproductive organs.
You have to recreate adult legs, adult antennae, adult eyes. You have to change the shape of the brain and the connections between the antennae and the eyes. You have to reformat the gut so that it switches from eating plant material to eating nectar. You begin to see the depths of the problem. So for evolution to have created this sort of pathway gradually, it would take a miracle.
When you see certain effects in nature, it's your responsibility as an investigator to find the cause that will explain the effect. If you saw a mechanical device of the sophistication of a butterfly, you would not for a moment hesitate to ascribe that to intelligence, because the butterfly is so much more sophisticated, almost beyond our comprehension, than anything that we make. Planning, foresight, artistry, engineering. When you process all the evidence revealed through metamorphosis, and then you ask yourself, in your own experience, what kind of cause could bring about these results? I think the only reasonable answer is an intelligence that transcends the natural world.
Okay, so if you go to the, as I said, the bottom of the study guide, which you can download at faithabq.org/classes, you can also see the 2 previous classes there. This third one's going to take a lot of editing. I didn't expect the problems with the laptop. I'm still having problems. But at the bottom, there's links to Metamorphosis, where you can actually buy the DVD. I don't get any money from that at all. I just really like it. Then Flight is the same producers, Illustra Media. There's a trailer there also. It's basically obviously about birds, hummingbirds, Arctic terns, eagles, so forth. It's equally well done. And then another one about living waters. So those I certainly recommend. They're each about an hour long, so the trailer is only a small part of it, but it's equally well. One more thing here. I feel like I'm going to manage to finish on time after all. The publication I showed you, a recent publication about human-engineered self-replicating machines, it's basically showing why human-engineered self-replicating machines are so difficult, and we may never be able to produce them. I doubt that we will, but it's supposed to have happened by chance. And but one thing I want to draw your attention to is at the very end, there's a link, another link to another great video that basically shows how humans self-replicate. Anyway, if you go to the my article and look at the video at the end, you might find that interesting. And as far as my Why Evolution's Different video that I showed 14 minutes of, we're going to show the last 10 minutes next time. You can see that also here. So we basically did 3 and 4A today, which is what I was intending to do, but had some problems. So here's the first 14 minutes. And one thing you might notice is that there are English, Spanish, Dutch, and Polish subtitles to this video. Actually, the main video we've been looking at has English, Spanish, and Polish subtitles. As a group in Poland that's translated my book and a lot of other ID books, and both of my videos put in. So, well, had to cut out some stuff and finish by 7:30. So I guess we'll take the usual 5-minute break and then can discuss things.
Thank you, Professor. I can't help myself. I did watch the full Metamorphosis film. It's an hour and 5 minutes long. It's wonderfully done. But the thing that struck me as I came to the end of that was remembering that the symbol for Easter was not always the Easter bunny. It was for thousands of years, well, over 1,000 years, the butterfly, because out of death comes life. And in many church decorations that you see that are white or gold in background, you'll see the butterfly design, even today, for that reason. We have a new class starting on Saturday. It'll be right after 5 o'clock worship. We'll have a little potluck upstairs, and then also upstairs we'll have a class on Judaism and how it provided many of the roots of Christianity. That'll be 8 weeks long, starting this Saturday evening, roughly 6 o'clock for the potluck and that class immediately following. So come join us for worship, for potluck, and for the class. And I thank you for being with us this evening, and I hope you'll come back next evening, or next week, at Wednesday evening, for the next installment. And as was said, we'll take a little bit of a break, and then question and answers and discussion will follow, but that part will not be recorded. Go in peace, or stay in peace.
Yes.